The starship Trinaxis was silent as it floated above the blue and green world below. Every crew member watched the screen in confusion. Earth looked beautiful from space, peaceful, calm, the kind of place where young explorers could train or elders could retire in comfort. But something didn't add up. Captain Zevak of the Zorth Confederation squinted at the data. Oxygen-rich atmosphere, strong magnetic shield, signs of intelligent civilization, and a rapidly growing technology base. Yet Earth was still labeled Class B, not hostile. Not dangerous, just curious. Send a drone, Zevak ordered quietly. The drone zipped through the clouds and began to scan major cities. It hovered near vehicles, watched humans from rooftops, and even passed over a large battlefield where soldiers were training with bullets, fire, and smoke grenades. The human soldiers were laughing as explosions shook the ground under their feet. One of them shouted, "Again! Closer this time!" As fire blasted past his helmet, the drone returned with hours of footage, but it wasn't the weapons or the smoke that caught the council's attention. It was the humans' faces. They were excited, not scared. They enjoyed the danger. They pushed each other harder. Pain made them grin wider. Zevak stood before the Galactic Council a few days later. He played the video, then paused on a close-up of a young woman covered in mud and blood, smiling as her arm was set back into place without anesthesia. "This is not a normal species," Zevak said, voice low. "They are thriving in environments others would flee from. They don't just survive, they challenge the danger to make it worse for fun." The council chuckled politely. A few whispered to each other. One delegate from the Lithari Alliance rolled his eyes and said, "Captain, you overreact. Every species has extreme individuals. Surely these humans are not the norm." Then came the signal, a distress call from Outpost Theta 19 on the edge of human territory. An unknown species had attacked massive beasts with acid blood, immune to plasma. Fire. The Lithari sent ships, confident in their elite soldiers. Zevak remained silent and watched. 3 days later, the Lithari fleet was torn to pieces. The outpost lost contact. Survivors were few. Only one escape pod made it out, cracked, blood-stained, and barely functional. Inside was a single human, breathing heavily, cradling the shattered remains of a weapon made from ship scrap and bones. He was laughing. When they pulled him from the pod, he looked around the medical bay and asked, "Did anyone else make it?" "No? Damn. All right then. When do we go back?" They thought he was in shock, but no. He stood up, stretched, and asked for more ammunition. He wasn't finished fighting. He had seen his team die, ripped apart, but that didn't break him. It made him calmer. The doctors reported his vitals. Elevated cortisol, adrenaline, dopamine. They thought he was dying. Then they realized he was just enjoying himself. "He thinks it's a game," one of the healers whispered. Zevak stood once. Again before the council. "We sent our finest, they died." He went in with a blade made of scrap metal and came out alive. "You asked for proof. This is it." Still, they hesitated. Still, they didn't believe. So Zevak sent an invitation without approval. A diplomatic visit to Earth. No guards, no weapons. Just observers. The humans welcomed them with smiles, open hands, and steaming cups of bitter black liquid called coffee that somehow made their minds sharper and hearts faster. The council members walked among humans for 2 days. Watched how children climbed dangerous heights for fun. How adults ran through storms and earthquakes to save strangers. How laughter followed disaster like it was part of the healing. The aliens were confused, then alarmed, then quiet. On the 3rd night, a human festival filled the sky with fire. Not war celebration. They called it fireworks. But to the aliens, it looked like an invasion. Explosions, screams of delight, glowing embers raining from the clouds. And not a single human flinched. A young boy approached one of the delegates. who had hidden under a bench. "It's just sparks," the boy said. "Don't be scared. My baby sister watches this, and she's only 3. The delegate, a veteran of 10 space wars, stared at the boy with wide eyes. He had fought nightmares in the blackest parts of the galaxy, but this child lived where danger was treated like a friend. When the council returned to the station, they were silent. No one argued, no one doubted. Zivak didn't speak. He didn't have to. The facts had spoken louder than any voice ever could. That night, the council erased Earth's file, then rewrote it in red. Planet designation, Deathworld, 1X reason. Psychological anomaly species not only resists threat, but seeks its status. Do not provoke, but it was too late. The humans had already heard the whispers, already decoded the alien channels, and they were laughing, because to them, it wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Asterisk. High orbit station Theta Aurelia buzzed with silence. Every screen now flashed the same warning in deep red: Deathworld 1X. The council members sat in cold shock, reading the new classification over and over. No one wanted to speak first. The silence meant they all agreed, but none were ready to admit what that meant. To fear a species was one thing. To label them uncontainable was another, but to call an entire world untouchable, that was a different level of fear. Ambassador Reth of the Elthery broke the silence. He looked at his trembling hands and whispered, "We can't stop them if they decide to expand. We have planets filled with peacekeepers. They have children who run into fire for fun." A recording began to play on the main screen. It was from a human training facility. Soldiers were thrown into mud, ice, and fire, literally fire, while instructors shouted at them to keep moving. One recruit's leg broke. He tied it to a stick and kept running. Another was bitten by a venomous creature. He crushed the creature in his bare hands and smiled as medics dragged him out. And the instructor simply nodded. "Good effort," he said. "Next time, dodge faster." The aliens in the room watched in stunned silence. These were not death rituals. These were training games, exercises, warm-ups. It made no sense. Zevak leaned forward. "We misread their DNA. We thought they were like us, flesh, bone, instinct. But they're built from something else. Something meaner. Maybe it's Earth. Maybe it's the gravity, or the animals, or the firestorms. But humans don't fear death the way we do." He tapped the screen again and played a different feed. This one showed a human science team walking into a volcano zone, not near it, into it. They wore heat suits, but the risk was still extreme. Molten rock burst beside them. One suit caught fire, but the human simply rolled and said, "I got the reading. Totally worth it." One of the council scientists whispered, "That zone melted 3 of our drones. How are they alive?" Zivak didn't answer. Instead, he played a last file, a classified one. It showed a battlefield in Sector 7H, where an alien mercenary army had tried to attack a human colony. They expected fear, screams, surrender. Instead, the humans responded by charging. Not hiding. Not escaping. Charging. One soldier called Mac on the comms was heard laughing through bloodied teeth. "I thought this was gonna be hard." The aliens fought with advanced weapons. Humans used knives and metal poles and homemade launchers. And still, they pushed forward like fire didn't burn them, like death didn't stop them. The alien commander had to call for retreat. He later filed a report labeled, "They are not normal." The council chambers dimmed. The final vote passed. Earth was now officially off limits. No trade. No visits, no interaction. Not for peace but for safety. They thought that would end it. It didn't. Within days, a human ship arrived near the Trolloc border. The captain was smiling on the transmission screen. He offered trade, peace, and a drink he called whiskey. When the Trolloc refused and warned him that Earth was now banned, the human just laughed and said, "That's okay. We'll just explore further. They did. And they didn't stop. Humanity spread fast. Too fast. Colonies appeared on planets once considered unlivable. Cold. They built heat cores, toxic air. They wore filters, monsters. They brought pets that bit back harder. What others called uninhabitable, humans called a challenge. The Council tried again. They sent a warning broadcast to all Earth channels, marked with red lights and deep tone frequencies. It read, by order of Galactic Council, humans must cease planetary expansion into zones marked hostile species territory. This is not a threat. This is for your protection. The humans replied with a meme, a cartoon of a human petting. A monster labeled, do not touch. The human said, good boy. The council stared at the image in disbelief. Then someone said what they were all thinking. They don't understand limits. And worse, they don't want to. In one secret meeting, Admiral Keska asked, what if we use force to slow them down? Zivak responded instantly, then you'll make them angry. You've seen what they do for fun. You don't want to see what they do when they're serious. Some council members still didn't believe. So they tried one last thing. They sent spies. Undercover agents landed on Earth, pretending to be diplomats, traders, and tourists. They studied human schools, hospitals, cities, military bases. They tried to blend in. Some did. Others didn't last long. One agent, pretending to be a lost visitor, was saved from drowning by a 12-year-old human. The boy didn't hesitate to jump into freezing water. Later, when asked why, he just shrugged and said, you looked scared. Another spy joined a group of extreme hikers scaling a deadly ice mountain. He fell. A woman grabbed him with one hand while holding her weight with the other. She pulled him up and said, you need stronger legs. Every agent came back with the same report. They're not fearless. They're afraid. They just don't let it stop them. Zevik stood once more before the council, watching all their faces, then said, we haven't discovered the galaxy's first Deathworld. We've discovered its most willing one. That's worse. And somewhere, across the stars, another human ship landed on a storm-filled planet marked unexplored, dangerous, avoid. A hatch opened. A human stepped out and grinned at the lightning. The city of Calthar 9, built on a floating platform over sulfur lakes, had never known visitors. No one came there unless forced. The atmosphere burned eyes, and the ground steamed with chemicals. Most species needed full bodysuits to breathe. For more than 10 minutes, then a human colony ship landed without warning. The Calthurian security team scrambled in confusion, expecting pirates or smugglers. What they saw instead was a group of humans in metal suits laughing at the smell in the air. One removed his helmet, coughed once, and said, smells like boiled eggs and armpits. But I've had worse breakfasts. They weren't invading. They were settling. Within hours they built tents, launched drones, and tested samples. By morning, they had already started building a small town, not a base, not a shelter. A town. With solar panels, wind towers, and a playground. The Calthurian governor sent a transmission to the council. Humans have occupied Sulfur Zone. No conflict. They seem happy. Please advise. The reply took a day. Do not engage. Observe. Maintain peace. But peace was hard to maintain when the humans invited locals for stew and skydiving. One human shouted, come on! The air burns a little, but the view is worth it. A few Calthurians did go, and came back changed. They weren't just impressed. They were confused. One asked a human child, why are you here? This place is poison. The girl looked up and said, Earth's got hurricanes, spiders, volcanoes, and bears that open car doors. This is cozy. The word spread. Humans weren't just surviving. They were redefining survival. And others started noticing, in the Dravari wastes, where acidic winds peeled metal, A human mining team set up drills and shelters made from heat-treated cloth and alloy bone. In the caves of Gorvel, where sonar beasts screamed loud enough to shatter stone, humans arrived with noise-canceling helmets and recorded the screeches to make music. One DJ became famous for it. The council watched each new report in disbelief. "They call pain motivation," said an elder scientist. "They turn fear into adrenaline. They train their young in disaster zones. They tell bedtime stories about monsters and still sleep soundly." Zevek sat in silence as others argued. "We should ban them completely." "We can't. They're already inside our maps. Then isolate them. Push them back. They'll take that as a challenge." Finally, Zevek stood and walked to the center. "Let me ask something," he said. "What happens when a species stops asking permission?" No one answered. "They're not asking if they're welcome. They're asking where they're needed." And then came the call from Azera 5. Tectonic fault line had split the planet in half. Hundreds of alien colonists were trapped. Rescue was impossible. Ships couldn't land. Tunnels collapsed. Emergency drones failed. Even the Council's best engineers couldn't design a fix in time until a human freighter heard the distress call. They weren't military, just haulers. Cargo movers. But they had cables, lifters, and something stronger, volunteers. Within an hour, they landed by crashing through the storm and skidding across molten rock. 5 humans exited with ropes, clamps, and dirty grins. "We're here to help." The Council begged them not to go. "It's too unstable. You'll die." One human, a woman named Freya, replied, "Then we better be fast." For 6 hours they pulled survivors out one by one. Fire rained from the sky. Earth cracked beneath their boots. One human broke his leg, refused evacuation, and continued directing the others. Another threw herself into a pit to lift a trapped child and used her own body to shield him from falling debris. When they returned with the last survivors, the alien leaders stood frozen. "You risked your lives for strangers?" The humans shrugged. "That's what people do." That sentence echoed across the galaxy. Suddenly, other species began to question what they had feared. Maybe humans weren't dangerous because they wanted to hurt others. Maybe they were dangerous because they didn't know how to stop helping. Even in the worst conditions. Even when told it was impossible. Soon, humans were being requested. Not as soldiers, but as problem solvers, builders, explorers, firewalkers, plague responders. If something was broken, humans could survive the fix. One alien asked Zevek, "Are they trying to impress us?" Zevek answered, "No, they're trying to live. This is just how they are." But not everyone liked this change. In the shadow corners of the Council, whispers grew louder. Some feared losing control. Others saw humans as a storm-wild, unpredictable, reshaping everything. One counselor snarled, "If we let them spread, nothing will stay the same." But it was too late. Humans had already begun reshaping the very idea of danger. Where others built walls, they made bridges. Where others fled storms, they chased them with cameras. And when Earthborn children asked why lightning struck, they didn't run, they went outside to watch. And deep in space, on a station orbiting a black hole, a blinking red light began flashing again. A human ship had just entered restricted space, labeled unreachable. They weren't lost, they were curious. The Black Hole Orbit Station was built for research, not rescue. Its spinning arms rotated slowly, powered by stolen light and silence. No species dared approach. The gravity waves shredded smaller vessels. The light distortions confused navigation. Even automated drones failed to return, and then came the human ship. It didn't slow down. It didn't hesitate. It drifted straight through the unstable corridor like a child walking through wind. The crew called themselves the Curious 8. Scientists, not warriors. Explorers with notebooks, coffee mugs, and reinforced hull. Plating, they docked to the external hatch of the research station and waved through the screen. One of them said, "Hi. Heard you needed help recalibrating your gravity dampeners. Brought snacks too." Inside, the alien researcher stared in open terror. "You came through the dark wave unshielded?" The human woman nodded and showed her arm, where gravity burns had scarred the skin. "Yeah, hurt like crazy, took turns at the helm, but we made it." The aliens didn't understand. That approach was considered a suicide path. The only answer they got was, "We had a bet who could get through with fewer injuries." Word spread quickly. Across the galaxy, leaders began to panic, not because humans were invading, but because humans didn't know how to stop. Every wall they hit became a puzzle. Every warning became a dare. Every danger became a classroom. Galactic laws were rewritten to limit expansion. New Deathworlds were locked down. Hazard zones were triple sealed. A special unit was formed to block Earth's access to red-tier regions. But it didn't work, because humans didn't knock. They climbed through windows, dug through caves, or walked in without asking. Not out of malice, out of instinct. Their entire history was built on chasing the horizon. Denying that impulse would be like asking fire not to burn. One alien diplomat tried to reason with a human ambassador. "You're infecting the stars with chaos." The ambassador raised an eyebrow. "You mean we're bringing life to places you gave up on? It's reckless. It's progress." The council called another emergency summit. Dozens of species demanded that Earth be quarantined. They argued it was the only way to preserve order. They claimed the humans would burn down everything if not stopped. But then the ambassador from Azera 5 stood up. She had been one of the children rescued during the Great Fault Line collapse. Her voice shook, but not with fear, with memory. "You call them reckless," she said, "but they gave us air when we were choking. You call them dangerous, but they risked death to pull us out. You call them mad, but they asked for nothing in return. Just remember that before you close the doors." The chamber went silent. And then came the final blow. The Rhinari were a race of shadow hunters. They ruled 3 systems through fear and silence. Their soldiers wore living armor. Their war beasts consumed planets. They sent one demand to Earth: surrender your colonies. Stay out of our stars. The humans replied by building a colony ship twice as fast, covered in reflective panels, and naming it the Nope. When the Rhinari attacked a human research camp, expecting easy victory, they found no defense system. They found students, young human trainees with mining tools, 0 armor, and 1 shortwave radio. But the students didn't run. They improvised. They redirected mining lasers. They collapsed tunnels strategically. They even overloaded their oxygen tanks to create firebombs. And when the Rhinari commander entered the final lab, a human girl stood calmly beside a pressure valve. She pressed the button. The explosion leveled the mountain. Weeks later, a transmission reached the council. A single Rhinari general stood in chains before the human delegation, blinking slowly. They don't fight like us. They make jokes while bleeding. They cry and still throw punches. They're not soldiers. There's something worse. They're determined. The council chamber shook with fear and wonder. At last, they had to face the truth they had avoided. Humans weren't just survivors. They were adaptive. They didn't beat death by overpowering it. They laughed while running through it. They rewrote fear, bent reality with stubbornness, and turned tragedy into challenge. Ancient map of galactic classifications blinked again. New files were created. A new tier was added to the danger system, one no species had ever reached before. Deathworld Humanity CLASS. The description was short: high variability, emotion-driven, logic-defiant, boundary-ignoring, compassionate to allies, ruthless to enemies, resistance inadvisable. The council didn't vote on this change. They simply watched the screen. And far beyond their chambers, a child born on an Earth colony stared at the stars and whispered, "What's next?" Because no matter how far the humans went, they always believed the next step was worth taking. Asterisk in the cold silence between stars, a new kind of map began to form. Not one based on power or technology, but on behavior. The Council scientists called it the Variable Aggression Resilience Chart, or VARC, but most species just called it the human map. It didn't track territory. It tracked where humans had been, and where they were willing to go next. At first, it was just red dots, Deathworlds where humans had colonized. Then orange zones appeared, hostile moons they had tamed. Next came black zones, the old forbidden regions the galaxy had sealed off centuries ago. Now humans were rebuilding outposts there, sometimes alone, sometimes side by side with species who had once feared them. No one gave them permission, no one could stop them. In a conference hall high above the moon of Krylos, a Zarnath the Elder sat with her claws folded, watching news footage of humans setting up homes in the magnetic canyons of Vertalin, a world once known to melt steel. The screen showed a human boy using a metal sled to race down molten sand dunes. His mother cheered him on from a tent reinforced with asteroid dust and optimism. The Elder turned to Zivak and whispered, "They're not building empires. They're building playgrounds." Zivak nodded. "That's what makes them unstoppable." The tension across the galaxy reached a boiling point, not from war, from disruption. Human laughter echoed in places where screams once ruled. Their explorers planted flags made of patchwork cloth and sometimes just carved "We made it" into stone. Their medics ran into plague zones with handmade cures. Their engineers dropped into sinkholes for fun and left behind power generators. Entire sectors began rewriting policy not to block humans, but to prepare for them. One merchant guild sent a warning: "Do not try to trick Earth traders. They enjoy haggling more than winning." One sold us better tech than ours just to see if we could figure it out. One scientist wrote a report titled, "On the Unpredictable Creativity of Human Panic." In it, he described how a human ship survived an engine failure by converting its waste system into a propulsion booster and using the ship's food replicator as a heat regulator. The crew's leader described the plan as a bad idea, but hey, it worked. The Council met once again to debate a critical question: what if humans reached the core worlds? The core had remained untouched for thousands of years, too sacred, too ordered. But already, human ships were circling its edge, tourists, students. And then came a strange signal. A human child had entered the Hall of the Old Stars, a place so ancient it was guarded by mental pressure fields and coded thought walls. She bypassed them all, not by hacking. She asked them questions they'd never been asked before, and the system responded. The eye that guarded the hall unlocked itself for the first time in 900 years. It displayed a message in hundreds of languages. Curiosity matched. Access granted. The Guardians were furious. But the eye refused to close again. It had found a mind that wasn't scared of mystery, just eager. A child. A human child. That day the council chambers divided into two clear camps. One half feared humans were becoming the center of galactic culture, bending laws, changing norms, making the unpredictable normal. The other half believed humans were the missing spark, that they brought life where others had chosen caution, that perhaps they weren't destroying the galaxy's structure, but fixing what had been too still for too long. Zevek stood alone between the two. Some of you want to cage them. Others want to follow them, but I suggest we do neither. One say, we learn from them. He played one last video. It showed a disabled child on Earth's frozen moon colony, trying to climb a hill on crutches. The winds were too strong. The slope was too steep. But behind her came other children lifting her, shielding her, shouting jokes as they slipped and fell together. They reached the top. The girl smiled into the cold wind and raised a small banner that read, "Hard is not bad. Hard is just hard." Zevek paused the video and faced the council. That is what makes them dangerous and beautiful and impossible to control. They don't avoid struggle. They walk into it and invite others to come with them. Across the galaxy, human influence spread like wildfire, not as conquerors, but as participants. They didn't take power. They shared pressure. They didn't demand leadership. They led by doing. And as the stars shifted, the ancient warning faded into something stranger. Not fear Earth. But Kalan follow Earth. Because for the first time in centuries, the galaxy wasn't getting smaller. It was opening up. The Grand Codex had not been edited in over 4,000 years. It was carved in crystal and preserved in quantum vaults. It listed every rule of galactic civilization, how to explore, how to avoid conflict, how to rank worlds by danger, and now for the first time, the Council voted to rewrite it, not because of war, not because of invasion, but because one species had made every category incomplete. The section titled Deathworld Classification now had a footnote. Category HX, Earth Origin Worlds, unpredictable, emotion-driven. Adaptability exceeds. Model forecasts, recommended, do not interfere. Do not provoke. If possible, cooperate. It was the first time a classification had carried a recommendation. Zevek stood in the center of the chamber as the final vote passed, but his eyes weren't on the screen. He was watching the stars through the glass wall behind him. Somewhere out there, humans were building something, he didn't know what. He only knew they wouldn't stop, and maybe they shouldn't. On the outer rim, an old mining colony had lost contact during a solar storm. Rescue teams failed. Satellites melted. Even drones couldn't survive the magnetic blast. Then, without warning, a signal came through. A human transport had landed by crash. Their engines failed, their supplies were gone, but they stayed. They dug, crawled, and carried alien miners one by one out of collapsed tunnels. One human died shielding a stranger. Another gave up their suit to save a child. When a council ship finally arrived, it found no one crying. Just tired humans and smiling survivors, sitting around a fire built from broken machines. A medic asked the human leader, "Why didn't you wait for help?" She replied, "Because we were the help." The story echoed across systems. Not because it was unique, but because it wasn't. This was Earth's pattern. Find the impossible. Enter it. Leave it better, on the world of Solari Prime, where gravity, twisted buildings, and time itself slowed. Human artists built a dance floor and invited locals to feel the rhythm between seconds. On Daranox, where air turned to acid every 90 minutes, humans invented floating greenhouses that could rotate crops mid-air. They left behind seeds and blueprints for free. A Lithari commander once asked a human engineer, "Don't you care about profit?" The human shrugged, "Sure, but we care about legacy more." And that was the part the galaxy struggled to understand. Humans weren't just expanding. They were sharing, not because they were saints, but because it was fun, because challenge thrilled them, because success was sweeter when others joined, because the idea of danger had become something else in their minds, not a warning, a signal, one that said, "Come see if you can handle this too." Some species still resisted. They built borders, installed shields, warned humans to stay away. But that didn't stop Earth's children from arriving as tourists, hikers, doctors, or musicians. And when the locals finally cracked and asked, "Why are you even here?" the answer was always the same, "To see what it's like." And always followed by, "Need a hand?" Over time, even the most hardened systems had to admit a quiet truth. They didn't fear Earth anymore. They respected it, not because humans were perfect, but because they never claimed to be. They made mistakes, failed loudly, argued fiercely, and still came back smiling, bleeding, And carrying someone else on their shoulders, Zevek stood one final time before the council. This time, the room was not tense. It was still. He placed an object on the floor, a helmet, scorched and dented, taken from a battlefield where no soldiers were supposed to survive. Inside the helmet was a note written in shaky, human handwriting. "We stayed behind because someone had to. Make sure the others get out. No name, no signature. Just sacrifice." Zevek pointed to it. "This is why they matter." The council nodded in silence. And so, the Grand Codex changed one final time, not a warning, not a ban, a new line carved at the very top above all laws and charts. Earth is not to be judged by its danger, but by its determination. Where it walks, life follows. Back on Earth, a child looked at a map of the stars on his bedroom ceiling. He pointed at one dark corner, smiled and said, "No one's gone there yet." His mother tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Then maybe you will." Because the galaxy had changed forever, not because of war. Not because of conquest, but because a blue and green world full of stubborn dreamers looked at danger and called it an adventure. And that was the day the galaxy stopped fearing Earth. And started following it.